Good morning. This is Natalie Gilley with the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota. Welcome to the Minnesota Bike Walk Leadership Network webinar. We have speakers today to talk about Winter Walk to School Day. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started here. So as I mentioned, we'll be celebrating Winter Walk to School Day, and the featured community for today will be Richfield, Minnesota. We're joining today on January 18th, 2023. So before we get into the content of our webinar today, we'd like to know who's here. So if you could go ahead and type in the chat box your name and the location of where you're joining us. Then we can get to know you a little bit and who's in the audience here. And I shouldn't say audience, I should say participants as part of the webinar, because the most beneficial thing I always hear about these webinars is the dialogue, the questions that come up and the dialogue with the speakers about the topic. So we invite you to participate in the webinar today in that way. This is the Minnesota Bike Walk Leadership Network webinar. Our purpose statement is to connect local bike walk leaders to share stories and ideas about how they're lifting up the walking and biking culture in their communities. We have a land acknowledgement statement, which I'll go ahead and read. We want to acknowledge that we occupy the ancestral land of the several indigenous groups, including the Dakota, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk, Cheyenne, Oto, Iowa, and Meskwaki people. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. We affirm the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities. Despite centuries of colonial violence, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Indigenous peoples are still here demonstrating innumerable talents and gifts in the midst of continued oppression. They must be celebrated and uplifted. You'll see on the screen here a link. This is a link that if CJ, if you'd like to put that in the chat box, that would be wonderful. You can click on this link if you would like to know what land you are located on. A promotional slide here to share with you walk bike fun in the winter. So this is not only a summer program, this is happening all year round. And we do offer trainings throughout the winter. You'll see the setup in the middle of the screen here on the slide that students are participating in a class inside, and the top right there, you'll see the gymnasium. So classes can be held and skills practiced on bike indoors during the winter here in the gymnasiums. So this is something to definitely apply for and engage with if you would like to. Angela Olson is our education director, and her email is angela@bikeandmen.org. Reach out to her if you'd like to learn a little bit more about walk bike fun in the winter. So at this point in the webinar, I'm going to go ahead and just introduce our first speaker today. We're excited to have two speakers today to talk about Winter Walk to School Day, with our featured community being Richfield, Minnesota. We're going to start out first with Kelly Corbin from MnDOT and talk a little bit more generally about Walk to School Day and some of the things that MnDOT is involved in. And then and then you can have an opportunity to ask her some questions, and then we'll dive into the topic of featuring Richfield. So welcome so much to the webinar, Kelly.
Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Corbin. I work at MnDOT on a mighty team of two that works and looks and funds safe routes to school statewide. My colleague, Dave Cowan, has been on this call numerous times. So you've seen one or two of us talking about safe routes. We are also part of a network that works with Move Minnesota, Bike Min, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, Minnesota Department of Health, to put on monthly safe routes to school network calls. This slide's a little old, so I wanted to tell you about our upcoming calls. We have them on the first Thursday of every month. I dropped the link where you could find recordings of past network calls and slides if they're helpful. I was just on maternity leave and spent time looking at all the past recordings, and they're really helpful. You can fast forward through some bits if you need, or watch them on fast speed, or they're great if you're out going for a walk. You can just listen to them like a podcast. Our next one is February 2nd, where we will actually be featuring Angela from Bike Min, talking about bike fleet maintenance and management for so many schools and school districts that have bike fleets. There's a lot of questions there, or for those who are thinking about it. We'll talk about funding them as well. And on March 2nd, we will be talking about getting ready for Bike to School Day. So we're talking about Winter Walk to School Day, but Bike to School Day is coming up in May. So we'll be featuring some local stories of how that works in different communities and resources available. And then I believe the following one in April is about the new Minnesota student survey that has some safe routes to school questions on it, but we haven't solidified that yet. All right, next slide, Natalie. All right, I love to show some of our fun pictures for Safe Routes to School, but I just wanted to give an overview of the program. We just had a 2020 strategic plan update where we altered our mission statement, which is youth in Minnesota can safely, confidently, and conveniently walk, bike, and roll to school and in daily life. And I just wanted to point out that in daily life, Safe Routes to School is actually a national program. There's federal funding that goes towards Safe Routes to School. There's Minnesota appropriations for Safe Routes to School. So that is the name and title we will continue to use, but we do view this work more broadly as getting kids to school, but also the destinations they normally go, which may be a park, an after-school job, a place to get food. And so we do support that work and look at that in the ways as much as we can fund them as well. All right, next slide. So Safe Routes is comprised of 6 E's. And if you are doing any sort of bike-friendly community applications or walk-friendly community applications, these E's might be familiar to you. When we've looked at the data and research, when we just do infrastructure changes or when we just do education and encouragement changes, there's just a small increase in people walking and biking. But the data suggests that if you do a comprehensive approach of both infrastructure changes and education and encouragement changes, you're going to see the largest increase of people walking and biking, and that's our goal. So we try to fund and encourage people to look at all 6 E's, which are evaluation, is your program working, and doing some assessments of what the needs are through engagement. Education, making everyone knows the rules of the road, as our Walk Bike Fun curriculum is, and I'm sure you've heard that on this call as well. Encouragement strategies, which I'm talking about today, tends to be our Walk and Bike to School days, where we have Walk to School Day is the first Wednesday in October. Winter Walk to School Day is just celebrated in Minnesota, but we are the bold north, so we go with it, which is Winter Walk to School Day, the first Wednesday in February, and Bike to School Day is the first Wednesday in May. Engineering improvements, you guys are very familiar with whether that's sidewalks, bike lanes, curb cuts, we've done traffic gardens, even whatever's needed to make it safer, more convenient for children to walk or bike to school or other destinations. And then we have our equity E, which really goes through all the other E's to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the community members and all community members there and wherever their starting point might be. So again, I'm talking about the encouragement E, which is our event days. Next slide, Natalie, which is our Winter Walk to School Day. I believe this is our 6th or 7th Winter Walk to School Day. It is coming up in just 2 weeks on Wednesday, February 1st, and it looks different in every community. And that's whatever you can get rolling with Walk to School Day or Bike to School Day. We have plenty of schools do Bike to School Day. In the winter, it works for us. So we've seen entire schools participate where the kids have to go and take a walk around the school zone, around the school before they go into class to get their wiggles out before school starts. We've seen just single classes go out and take a walk, maybe do a walking field trip, or English or literature classes will go out and do a story walk in the winter, which is where there's a page of a book every so often on a yard sign. So kids will walk, stop, read the page, continue on their walk, stop, read the page. That's a great way for a class to get engaged. Or we've just seen a neighborhood get together and have kids walk to school on that day. So it can be as small or as large as you want it to be or willing to plan it to be or have support to make it. We have been really supported by the governor's office and typically have a proclamation that February 1st is Winter Walk to School Day. So as soon as that's made available, we will share that out. It is something fun to share in your on your social media or your communication networks that you may have and show that there's support for walking and biking year round in Minnesota. We also have a lot of resources, and we've this year made them in multiple languages, the key languages that are spoke in most Minnesotan schools. This includes social media posts, which might be actual pictures and verbiage that you can use on social media posts, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever social media network you use. We have flyers that can be printed and posted around schools to help promote the day, postcards that can be mailed to students who are in the walk zone. We have the graphics for Winter Walker stickers, or graphics that you can print out frequent Winter Walker punch cards that when they're full, the school can give out a prize to that student. So it's really about rewarding the students who might already walk or bike to school, encouraging more students to try walking and biking, or getting all students walking that day and getting excited that we live in Minnesota. Walking or biking in winter is not the craziest thing we do. Personally, I think cutting a hole in ice and sitting around it and fishing is a crazy thing, or hopping on the back of a snowmobile and going 60 miles per hour when it's 5 degrees out, it's pretty crazy. Going for a walk is definitely not the craziest thing we do. So embracing our winter and living in the bold north is where we want to celebrate Winter Walk to School Day. Next slide, Natalie. And that's where we also have our Golden Snow Boot Award. So the original Golden Snow Boot was Dave, my colleague's child snow boot that he spray painted gold and gave away that day. Now we just kind of give a graphic of the Golden Snow Boot, but it definitely has a legacy. And this is where we have pictures submitted from the schools that participate, or the neighborhood groups that participate, and we choose the best one. And really the photos are great, but the stories behind it are even better. So the top right one comes to us from Egan, and that was a class that went out and took a winter walk through their nature and kind of combined their classroom exercise with the tasks or the topics that they were teaching that day. The bottom right is Congdon School in Duluth, and that was a very frigid day that they were walking to school. I believe it was single digits, and just had an overwhelming amount of students who are walking to school. And then the one on the left is our most recent award winner last year, which is in Rice, Minnesota, and they just completed a Safe Routes to School plan where the primary barrier in their community was the railroad track, which you can see there in the photo, and getting kids from the neighborhood across the railroad track to where the school was. And so they did the Winter Walk to School Day, where they showed parents and students the route to take and the safest way to cross that railroad track. And they actually had some elected officials, I believe, along that route to talk about what some infrastructure improvements could be. So they really did a fun day that was educational for students and parents, but also was a way to promote and encourage infrastructure changes with their city leaders. So it's a really great way to be strategic about the event days. So it can be fun, it can be strategic, it can be whatever your community needs. So I will drop some links on the resources we have, the Golden Snow Boot Award, the materials that I promoted, as well as some other things. So I'll drop those, and I think we're going to pass it over to Will to talk about what it looks like at a local level.
Thank you, Kelly. And before we pivot to our second speaker today, I want to hold a little time for questions and answers. Kelly has shared on the screen her contact information. So if you'd like to email her with any follow-up questions about some things that she presented today, or something that you think about after the fact, when the webinar is all over, feel free to go ahead and email to Kelly. So I'll pause for a moment here, and we'll see if we have any questions from the group for Kelly about winter walking and what she shared from MnDOT. So I guess there's a data question, a couple of data questions that have come up. My slides are advancing on me. All right, there we go. We're back to where we should be with closing Q&A with Kelly. There were some questions about data and about like finding out, how many kids they're participating and where these events are happening. So there's been a couple of questions that are coming through around that. I guess I'd like to just start by like the folks that are on the webinar right now. If you are able to use the reactions button on Zoom, can you raise your hand if you are participating in a Walk to School Day? Let's see if we can find out who on the webinar today is participating. I've got a thumbs up from Rochester. Let's see who else. I saw on the pictures, Kelly, that you shared in Richfield. We'll get to you soon in Rice, Minnesota. And Josh is on here from South Central Minnesota, Faribault, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. All right, so great to see some folks here that have participated in Walk to School Day. So if you would like to ask a question to Kelly, you'll need to unmute. You've come into the webinar muted, and I'll pause for a moment. And if anybody would like to ask a question, I see Dorian, you have your hand up. Go ahead and ask your question, Dorian.
Hi. A couple of weeks ago during the Safe Routes Steering Committee meeting, Dave presented some really impressive statistics that I think said they were from the National Safe Routes Partnership and academic research on over 1,000 schools nationwide that said something like, if you invest in infrastructure, 18% more kids bike and walk. If you invest in education, 25% more kids bike and walk, or education and engagement programs like we're talking about today. And if you do both, it's 31%. So I've spent a lot of my time recently just trying to make sure that whenever there's something that says invest in building stuff, I always try to get them to add a sentence that says, and the education and community engagement that'll maximize your investment in that infrastructure. So I think that's a really great phrase to use. And thanks, Kelly, for bringing it up, that statistics do show that doing stuff like this really makes a difference. And when you're spending millions or tens of millions on infrastructure and thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands on education and engagement, you know, what's a good investment? Or they're both very good essential investments.
Yeah, thanks, Dorian. And we can get anyone that slide. If you want to email me, I can get you the slide we have. And also there's tons of Safe Routes to School research out there. If you want to do a lit review, or if you need any of those data points, we can help you, or we have a lot in our Minnesota Safe Routes to School Resource Center. So if you click some of the links that I provided you, that'll take you to our resource center where you can look in the About Us or look for some of those data points. Thanks, Dorian. I did see another question was how many schools participate, and it really, I think this is our 6th or 7th year, and it really changes. Obviously, it was kind of quieter during the pandemic when schools weren't in session over the winter months. But the last I heard, we're up to 35 schools in Minnesota participating, which is really good for Winter Walk to School Day. When we get to walk and bike to school days in the fall and spring, we tend to see some numbers that get between 150 and 200 schools across the state participate. And I can drop a link for those days. That's a national registration. So you can look at schools that have participated in the past and see if anyone is around you.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that information. I see another hand up here. Josh, did you want to ask a question?
Sorry, I forgot to put it down when you asked from before.
Okay, no worries. All right. So does anyone else have a question here? Does CJ maybe I'll just pause for a moment. Is there anything in the chat box that I may have scrolled past here that we'd like to raise the question to Kelly before we move to our second speaker?
I think we've done a good job of covering people's questions.
Okay, great. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing your information. We'll have our second speaker present, and then we'll have a closing Q&A. So if anyone does think of any other questions in the meantime, feel free to either put them in the chat box or, you know, hold your question and we'll cover it at the end. So thank you so much. So our second speaker today that I'd like to welcome to the webinar is Will Wlizlo, and he is the Safe Routes to School Coordinator for Richfield Public Schools. So it's very exciting to feature Richfield today and the Winter Walking Day in Richfield, Minnesota. So Will, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you for having me, Natalie, and thanks for the introduction. I'm Will Wlizlo, Safe Routes Coordinator for Richfield Public Schools. Today, I am hoping to cover a few topics. I'm going to give you a little introduction to just the community of Richfield and then we'll move into the more specific content. We'll talk about our general promotional strategy for Winter Walking Day in our school district. And then I'll do a deep dive into 3 of our schools and kind of how we have made that work for different kinds of schools. And then lastly, I have kind of like a big takeaway that I want to share, a big universal learning from our winter walking programming. So if you'll advance to the next slide, Natalie, I'll start with our introduction to Richfield. If you're not familiar with it, it is a Twin Cities metropolitan suburb. It's the nearest rectangle to the south of Minneapolis, if that helps you place it, right next to the airport. The community is pretty fully developed. There are about 37,000 people who live here, according to the most recent census. And it's also kind of traditional street grid. So if you were to drive south out of Minneapolis into Richfield, you would see the same rectangles that you were experiencing in Minneapolis. So pretty kind of traditional boxy street style. The demographics of the city of Richfield have changed a lot, especially over the past 20 years. And what used to be a very white community is now about 1/3 Latino or Hispanic or Spanish speaking in Richfield. The city itself bills itself as the urban hometown. That's their little slogan. But what they mean by that is that they have safe and supportive neighborhoods for people to live in, for all of their residents, and that it has kind of a small town feel, even though it's really close to the urban core. Richfield is also a bicycle friendly community. It recently was upgraded to silver level BFC from a bronze, where it was holding steady for about 8 years. And that includes lots of cool stuff, including a really awesome complete streets program called Sweet Streets that's transformed the community in really to be almost unrecognizable from 10 years ago. So it's seen a lot of change over the past decade. And then, coming a little closer to home for me, Richfield Public Schools is a smaller district compared to many of them in Minnesota. It has 4 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school, plus a couple of extra programs for alternative education, that sort of stuff. All in all, it's about 4,500 students, and about 70% of those are students of color. Why don't you go to the next slide, Natalie? Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about our general promotion because all of our schools participate in Winter Walking Day. But as you'll see in the coming slides, a lot of them are pretty different what that looks like on the day itself. So before I do that, I just want to note that you'll see a few of these bullet points throughout the presentation that are bolded and italicized. I want you to just hold those in the back of your mind, and I'm going to come back to all of those. But in general, in Richfield Public Schools, we host Winter Walking Day on the last Wednesday of February, which is different from the rest of Minnesota, which Kelly was just describing. We have about a 1 to 2 week long communications plan for Winter Walking Day. It includes lots of stuff, including take-home flyers for our students, posters that are taped up in all of our schools, as well as different kinds of email and text communication that goes home to families. Additionally, the outreach staff at individual buildings reaches out to specific families or specific groups that might not otherwise get the message for whatever personal reason. They know about those families, and they do their best to make sure everybody knows what's going on. We have fun stickers that we've printed off, and anyone who participates, including the adults, gets to wear one of those on the Winter Walking Day. And then, of course, after it's all done, we post those photos of smiling kids in winter hats onto our social media. Next slide, please, Natalie. So that's true of all of our schools. And then we kind of change things up from school to school as far as the actual day of events. And the first school I'm going to talk about is our Richfield Dual Language School. For those of you who've been to Richfield, it's in the center of the city. We have kind of like a long rectangle. And this school hosts what we call the Winter Parade. The whole school of just over 500 elementary school students takes a walk around the block. It's kind of on this dual campus, so it's bigger than your average city block. So all in all, the walk takes about 25 minutes for a little kid. One thing that is notable about the dual language school is it's an open enrollment kind of magnet school style program. And that means that a lot of the students live way, way, way far away from our school. Some students come in from neighboring suburbs or even farther. And just in general, the school has a higher proportion of families that need to drive to get into school or need to take the bus. The number of students who live close to school and could feasibly walk is pretty small compared to our other schools. So we do this programming during the school day. Usually it leaves the front door around 10:30 in the morning. This allows the students to actually participate. It increases the programming reach. The students also get to stay with their classroom teacher, and so it's a very comfortable experience for everyone who maybe isn't comfortable walking outside in the winter. We also get to experience a couple of different walking environments. So part of this block is served by sidewalks and part of it is not. So we do a little bit of walking on our protected pedestrian routes and then some on the roadway. Will you go to the next slide, please, Natalie? We've got a couple more photos of our winter parade. You can see students walking down the bike lane on 70th Street, which can be pretty busy. And then that second photo on the right is our principal participating too. She is a big fan of this event. Okay, well, let's move on to the next school. Natalie, you can advance. And we're going to go across the city to Centennial Elementary School. Unlike the kind of broad enrollment area of the dual language school, this is one of our community schools. All of the families live fairly close by to this school. This is a very different kind of school. And one of the things that they really focus on is trying to connect with the people who live nearby, the families and the neighbors, through their events and other non-academic programming. So Winter Walking Day was a really great opportunity to build on one of their kind of pre-existing goals. For this event, we have an add-on, and at Centennial Elementary School, we do a winter fashion show and photo shoot. This happens in the morning. As students walk in, they are greeted by a fashion photographer who gets a photo with them wearing their most favorite winter accessories. Usually there are many kids who dress up extra special for this day. They may get the opportunity to take a photo with their principal, also wearing something silly and wintry, or the school mascot, who's Capers the cougar. You can see him in this photo. And it adds just a little bit of excitement to the morning. Another thing that we can do with this particular event is we invite some of our high school students to help out and volunteer. So it builds the community of people who are moving through the entire Richfield Public Schools system and kind of creates connections across different grade levels. Lastly, we also allow people who are taking the bus to participate in the photo shoot and get the sticker at the end of it. Inclusivity is a huge part of our district's kind of operating system. And so we allow the people who take the bus as well to get in on the fun. Go to the next slide, Natalie. Just a couple more photos from the day. We've got our fashion photographer sitting on the floor on the right-hand side, a couple of students dressed up in favorite unicorn outfits, etc., on the top. And I'll just note that this kind of event can be a really great opportunity to engage elected officials or other kind of like high priority stakeholders in your community. On the bottom, that's me with one of our city council members, Councilmember Sean O'Leary, who had a lot of fun with the fashion shoot too. All right, Natalie, next slide, please. The last school I'll talk about is Richfield High School. One thing that is important to note is that across the board, high schoolers are exceptionally cool and very smart and don't fall for our lame adult tricks to get them to do things like Winter Walking Day. So our PE teacher, Tracy Hoffman at Richfield High School, has nevertheless tried to outsmart them. She hosts a lifelong activity class and has been doing bike education, for example, for a long time. And now she is doing a coffee and cocoa walk during their class time on Winter Walking Day. It's as simple as it sounds. The students walk through the neighborhood with their PE teacher and just talk about whatever they want to. But they get out for about a 40-minute walk and come back. They've had some cocoa or coffee, depending on their tastes, and they've participated in a way that's really appropriate for older students who want to hang out with friends and socialize, but maybe don't want to hang out with the adults as much. So this has been just a really kind of fun, simple, effective way to engage high school students in walking too. So go ahead to the next one, Natalie. Now, all of the notes on this slide are things that have been bolded and italicized from previous slides. And the kind of concluding point that I want to make is that successful Winter Walking Day programming, or frankly, any programming that you're doing in schools, can really be a lot more successful if you try to consider the motivations, concerns, needs of the administrators that you're working with. So, just kind of looking through all of these, I'll just kind of walk through these briefly. We have chosen to do the last Wednesday of February, unlike the rest of the state, because in our district, we typically have conferences and professional development in the first week of February. So it just really would not be a successful event. And this was one way that we could get the administration on board to celebrating Winter Walking Day. We make sure to get lots of great photos for our social media, because one thing that you'll find with public school districts is that they face intense competition these days from private schools or charter schools or other non-public schools. And so promoting their district as a fun and healthy place for a student to attend is really important for the communication staff. So I would argue that it's always important to be on good terms with the communication staff. This is one way to help that. When we move to talk about Richfield Dual Language School, I already kind of described our large enrollment area and how we can't necessarily expect a lot of students to walk that day because they just may live 15 to 20 miles away, even in an urban context. So knowing about the enrollment area and how the school operates is really important to making sure you've got a successful event. We're going to bop down to building community through events and programming. This was related to Centennial Elementary School. This is something that operates on a really fundamental level if you walk through the classrooms of Centennial Elementary School. So trying to meet the goals of the principal there was something I wanted to do, and also got me in the door to talk about actually doing some additional programming on top of general promotion. And then, just kind of going down to the last one with high schoolers, it's really important to know your audience, and that a dinky sticker is probably not going to be very cool for a 17-year-old, but getting to get out of high school for an hour and have somebody give you a coffee, that could be cool and get students engaged. So it's just important to work with the people and know what their interests are. It's kind of a banal point, but it's one that I like to make. I guess I'll just kind of conclude and say that because we've been able to tailor our programming to the individual schools and communities, it means that the principals are excited for it for next year. So it's another way to kind of build longevity into your programming. And with that, I think I'm going to conclude. Natalie, you can go to the next slide and just say I encourage everyone to try Winter Walking Day or some kind of programming in their own community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Will. This is really impressive and awesome to see all these pictures and this programming. I think your closing point about tailoring it to the schools is amazing. It was definitely came through in your presentation today that you took the time and are well versed on how each of these different schools is approaching this, and you engaged with them on walking and encouraging them to get involved in this event. So that's really cool. So thank you so much for your presentation. This has been great to hear all of what you had to share today. So all right, so yes, it's Q&A time, so I should pause and let other folks ask questions if they would like to. So feel free to put your question in the chat box or go off mute and ask your question directly. I have a couple closing slides, but I think I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment so folks can engage in some dialogue. All right, so here's one of the questions from the group. What lessons were learned? What would you try differently in the future, Will?
That's a great question. I think it came from CJ. I think that one of the lessons I have learned, a keen observer would note that I didn't include a slide about our middle school. And I would note that it is very hard to engage middle schoolers in all kinds of stuff. I am still seeking an exciting activity that will appeal to 13-year-olds. Perhaps all of us are. But I think that setting modest expectations and hoping to improve on them is just like a great lesson for all things, really, but was especially true in our winter walking programming. For example, when we started the Centennial fashion show and photo shoot, the first year we had fairly minimal walking for that school. And after the photos came out and the PTO got a hold of them, they were able to drum up more excitement for next year. And so in that way, even though it was a fairly small event the first year, it was successful because it was able to be built upon for the following year, I guess is how I would answer that. Low expectations. Have the world blow you away.
Michelle, did you want to ask your question?
I do, because I'm too lazy to type. First of all, thanks everybody. This is wonderful, and something just popped up on my cursor. Okay. Great ideas. I'm right across from a school where there's a noisy school bus right now. So I'm hoping for more walking to school with my own school next door. Question about follow-ups and feedback from students and teachers and parents and guardians. Do you collect any sort of data around that? How they feel, what they think, what would make it easier, etc.
Great question, Michelle. So the kind of data that we collect related to Winter Walking Day, we try to get a rough participation number. That's one piece of data. As far as the kind of like qualitative perception data, we primarily lean on our Safe Routes to School parent survey, which is an evaluation tool that's organized nationally and scientifically tested and all that fun stuff. That typically comes out for our district in February anyhow. So often the results are pretty closely tied to that event, or at least the event is top of mind. But we don't do, I would say we don't do like stakeholder interviews on the sidewalk after the event.
I'll just jump in and say I dropped the link to all of our Safe Routes to School survey tools. So the parent survey, like Will is talking about, is kind of our standard tool that we use. I can drop the link. We have one that's more of a visual tool that can be used at events where people can just put a sticker for where they think the barriers are to walking or biking to school, or what they would need to get their kids walking or biking to school or other destinations. So like Will said, the parent survey and then the student tallies are the two national resources. And then we've come up with a few others in Minnesota. And that one I would mention too is the school zone hazard observation. So that's having a team of people be around the school and actually view how students are using the infrastructure, but also how the drivers are behaving around school. Are they actually making a full stop at the stop sign? Are they texting and driving? Are they speeding? And some things like that that can be really helpful. So if you have a group that's interested in doing that and providing the data to the school, that could be really helpful in getting them interested in safe routes to school, or working with electeds to get some infrastructure changes. So if you can't get into the school to do the parent survey or the student tallies, that would be something that could be helpful. Just give the school a heads up that you're doing it so they know why all these adults are hanging out around the school area. But that data could be helpful. And then there's a couple other pieces there that you could look at if you're looking at collecting some more data.
That sounds like a great tool, and it was really cool to see that you were dropping the link in the chat box as Will was talking about it. You were on the same page 100%. So that was cool to see. One of the questions I have, just as a follow-up question, maybe on the survey, is whether or not you've seen if there's any surprises that have come back on the survey that have informed, you to change course in how you've approached the walk to school day. And if there's any comments or anything that you'd like to share about that.
Let's see, the thing that comes to mind is, so I mentioned at the top of my presentation that Richfield has a large Latino population. And one of the things that I've heard from our outreach workers is that culturally, folks from Spanish-speaking countries and cultures don't like the Minnesota winter. That's obviously a generalization, but these are things that our Spanish language outreach people constantly say to me when I tell them about Winter Walking Day. And I was surprised to find various qualitative comments related to Winter Walking Day saying, we were surprised how easy this was. We were surprised how fun this was. Also plenty of comments that said, it's too cold. You need to do something to warm up the winters. So I guess I normally expect to get nothing but constructive or critical feedback in those. But I was surprised to see some people responding to the programming in a positive way on that engagement tool.
I'll just share one piece of feedback we've had from some other schools that have done kind of whether people are coming from their parents' car, they're walking or biking or getting dropped off by a bus, they make all the students take a lap around the school property before they go into the classroom. And teachers will report that they've had fewer behavioral issues that day because students kind of get their wiggles out, which is really needed in winter when kids might not be going outside during recess or playing outside after school. And so having that physical activity in the morning or having kids doing it at lunch can be really helpful for teachers and the school day as well, with some added benefits there. So we've had some cool different ancillary things that have helped when these days happen, and encouraging walking and biking more often than just these days.
Yeah, that's it's great to hear some of these comments and the a little bit of the results from the surveys. As folks that are on this webinar may be thinking about, oh, okay, I'd really like to start one of these winter walking days at a school in my community. And there was a comment here in the chat box. You may have seen this too. Josh made a comment about, I think it's funny when people say it's too cold, yet the same kids play on the playground all day long in the cold. So it's maybe just a shift in the mindset about how you're approaching the work. So fair point.
It's more of a barrier for the parents than the children, maybe, is what you could take from that.
Yeah, the kids like to be out there playing around and enjoying the that great outdoors. So. All right, so I do have a couple of closing slides before I go to the closing slides here for the webinar today. Is there anyone else that's on the webinar that would like to ask a question of either Kelly or Will, or had a follow-up comment related to what was discussed here? I saw another link, Kelly, you dropped about the engagement tools, and then Michelle mentioned Pekka in Oulu, Finland, as posting up a lot of different videos and media online about kids biking, walking, and kick sledding in Oulu, Finland. So that's kind of fun. I see that we have a hand raised here. Joanne, would you like to ask a question?
No, I was just gonna do a call out. I see Dustin Morrow's on the call here. And we are working with Rochester schools to get ready for Walk to School Day. And so some winter Walk to School Day to try to make it a little bit easier for one of the walking school buses at a particular school. So this morning, we met with the communications team from Rochester Public Schools to do a little preview of Winter Walk to School Day. So we walked with the walking school bus and got some interviews with the crossing guards and the kids to put on social media prior to Winter Walk Day. It was super icy because of all of the melting. So one of the things that will happen next week is the kids on the walking school bus are going to do door hangers on the route to say, we appreciate it so much when you clear your sidewalk for us, because it's easier for us to get this to school. So we want to thank you. So just a couple of things to put out there to kind of build the momentum of walking to school and let people know along the way that there are people out using these sidewalks. So it's really nice when you shovel.
Thanks, Joanne. We have one. Oh, you raised your hand again. Did you have a follow-up comment?
Oh,
I lowered your hand, so I might have thrown you off. All right, so one closing comment here that I want to give Kelly the floor to just share a little bit about funding related to all of what we're talking about today to get the kids walking in the winter. So go ahead, Kelly.
Great. If you're thinking about doing something with any walk and bike to school days or getting safe routes to school started in your community, I just want to plug that we do have funding available for that every year. Typically, our grant options open in October and close in the winter. So we don't have anything open yet, but it's a great time to start talking to your partners and plan ahead for next fall. Getting people engaged. One of the questions on our application is, do you have a Safe Routes to School team together? You don't have to have an official team to apply, but it definitely helps you complete that application and be ready when the funding happens. We have a planning assistance grant, which gets you Safe Routes to School program started in your community or get you thinking about what's needed. Our boost grants is more geared towards walk and bike to school days or whatever is needed for you to boost your Safe Routes to School programs to the next level. And so if you click that link, there is some ideas there. If you need help figuring out what's been done, Will has received several boost grants, as has Rochester. I see Mallory's on here from the Northwest area. So plenty of people on this call have received those grant fundings. And then there's also links to infrastructure funding, which people are very interested in. I've also linked our active transportation funding, which is a new program that has both planning assistance, demonstration projects, and infrastructure grants that it has funded. And that funding, there's nothing open right now, but that funding likely will open again this spring. So if you're interested, there's the websites. We also have a newsletter that you can click on those websites if you want to hear when the funding's available. Otherwise, we'll try and pop back in on these calls when funding is open as well. That's
Thanks,
all.
Kelly. That's great. And, as mentioned previously in the webinar, that the first Wednesday is February is the Walk to School Day, and that the first Wednesday of May is Bike to School Day. So we have the, an opportunity then to revisit this engagement with the schools and how to make these happen. So there's probably some parallel lessons that might be applied to both approaches. So, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again here. We have a couple of closing slides for the webinar today. So let me go to that. So we feature every month what turns out to be a really long list of events that are taking place between the webinar we're holding and the next webinar 1 month later. And we don't even have them all captured on here, but we'd like to share this. In the Twin Cities area, there's a number of events here through Free Wheel Bike, St. Paul Bike Coalition, Fat Biking when Melanin in Motion at Theoworth, Night Riding with Bonesaw, Frosty Fat Tire Festival, and the Great Minnesota Bike Swap. People ask about that sometimes, so put that on your calendar if that's interesting to you. And then in Greater Minnesota, there are a number of events here too, a few that are featured on this slide: Women's Night Fat Biking in Duluth, Freezer Burn Race in Cambridge, Nicollet Bike Fat Bike Rides, Mankato weekly ride, Owatonna weekly ride with the Trail Association, the Arrowhead 135 up in International Falls, and then Fat Biking Adult YMCA Camp in Babbitt. So it's great to see the statewide representation here on this list of events. And I know this isn't everything, but this is a number of them. So definitely check out the bikemn.org/all events page on our website if you'd like to look for more events that are taking place and get out and ride in the winter. The next slide here is about our Minnesota Bike Walk Summit on Capitol Hill. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Dorian to talk a little bit more about this exciting and upcoming event. Dorian, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Natalie. I am really excited about the 2023 legislative session. As you all probably know, the Democrats are back in control of the Minnesota Senate. And are excited about spending some of that surplus money on things like climate issues, which would include biking and walking, and public health, which would include biking and walking. And the best way to support that is to attend in person our Bike Walk Summit on February 9th. Attend it virtually, or read about our legislative agenda and contact your legislators either by going to a local meeting with them or by phone or email, and let them know that you support BikeMN's legislative agenda. And Natalie, do you have a legislative agenda slide or not? And that's okay. I'll just keep talking. I also wanted to add that we're going to have some great speakers, including Patrick from Partnership for Health, talking about how you can make the case for investment in biking and walking in your community, make the public health case for investing in biking and walking in your community to your legislator. Why it's important to support SHIP, why it's important to support the funding that's going to be part, and the programming that's going to be part of BikeMN's legislative agenda. And We Bike Rochester will also be speaking about what a local chapter of BikeMN can get done in a community. I think it's really exciting what's going on in Rochester. And a lot of it has to do with the advocacy work that's being done locally. We're also going to hear from the mayor of Winona, Scott Sherman, to talk about what's going on and why Winona has been a bicycle-friendly community for, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years, somewhere in that neighborhood. And Ramsey County, the chair of the Ramsey County Board, who rides an e-bike to work, is going to be there too. I've also invited the governor and Mayor Carter, but they never commit to anything until a week or two before the event. So just a quick summary of our legislative agenda. Our big bill is going to be an omnibus bill, which includes just about everything policy and funding wise. It'll include nearly $100 million in funding for active transportation and safe routes to school, and maybe maybe MnDOT will use some of that funding, or hopefully MnDOT will get lots of new funding. And maybe they'll use some of that to fund more safe routes to school coordinators like Will. And more people will be out there that can steal some of Will's great ideas and other great ideas that are going around the state. It'll include some policy stuff like as far to the right as practicable, changing that. And it will also include some e-bike funding, hopefully e-bike rebates, and funding for some e-bike infrastructure, including charging stations in public places, downtown areas, multifamily housing, that kind of stuff. So I hope you can all be there and bring lots of people from your communities and your areas of the state. So thank you, Natalie.
Thanks, Dorian. And just like, I want to just make sure that we've highlighted all three of the bullet points before the link to the registration, is that there's three different things that I want to make sure that you take away here. Is that register to attend. The online registration is open. So go ahead and register so we can see that you're engaged, that you're planning to be there. Sign up as a volunteer. Volunteers are always really helpful to make these successful events. And there's a lot to do to pull together an event such as this. So we could definitely use volunteers if you're interested in engaging in that capacity. And just the other piece here is to request a scholarship or a travel stipend so that that barrier isn't something that stands between you and speaking directly with your elected officials in St. Paul. So this is our Minnesota Bike Walk Summit, and we hope to see you there. And one closing comment here from Dorian, I'll hand it back over to you.
I also wanted to share with you all that the big omnibus bill is going to be called the Bill Dooley Bicycle Safety Act. And Bill Dooley was the longtime chair of our Legislative Advocacy Committee. And Bill passed away from cancer on December 23rd. After, it was a very aggressive cancer at less than 6 months after his diagnosis, but he chaired our advocacy committee on the Monday before he died. So he was passionate, he was engaged, and it's an honor to have the legislature recognize that by naming the bill after him this year.
Thanks for mentioning that, Dorian. And CJ has put the link here as well into the chat box with the link to register for the Bike Walk Summit. If you'd like to go ahead and register, and definitely reach out if you have questions about this event or how to get more engaged with your elected officials and this work to influence some change. We're here to help you and support you through that, and we'd love to see you in St. Paul. So thank you so much for joining today. And again, thanks to Kelly Corbin and Will Wlizlo for your presentations today. It was great information, and I know that I learned a lot today from all the details that you shared, and I hope that everyone else did as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day.